You'll keep my name out of this, right?
I thought you'd hit the ceiling of your career.
Well, I still need a job.
That's the way it works, yes. No one will know your name, not even my editor.
Okay, good.
I think I have a reel-to-reel player in the trunk of my car.
You have a player in your car? Why didn't you mention that? What?
Because in a perfect world, I would have the tape and be listening to it alone. But it's your tape.
It's my tape.
Yes, it's your tape. And maybe I'm not making this clear, but I'm looking out for you.
Okay, and maybe you're not listening to me, but I don't need you looking out for me. I give you this tape, you splash it all over the cover of the Times, it gets traced back to me in a heartbeat. You win the Pulitzer and I get indicted. No, we're not doing that. We're gonna listen to the tape together. You're gonna take your little notes, and I'm returning the tape at work on Monday morning. That's the deal.
Okay. I think there's a motel nearby. I saw it on the way up here, the Silver Sands. You can check in there. We'll say that we're a married couple so we don't draw attention. Or dating. No, married. Married's better. One last name.
What?
What?
What is the Silver Sands?
It's a motel. I saw it on the way up here.
Why can't we just listen to it in your car?
I need an outlet. And we want someplace private.
Fine. Why can't we just be there together and then separately?
Have you seen the size of this town? It's gonna
Nobody
draw...
knows what we look like, so...
We have to play the long game here. No one can ever know we're here. Not tomorrow, not 30 years from now. So we go there, we listen to it, we leave.
Do you expect me to check into a motel with a man that I just met?
Do you have a better idea? Because I don't.
You seem really nervous.
I'm not nervous. I'm not. I'm excited. Been waiting for this opportunity for a long time. If I'm nervous about anything, it's that you're lying to me. You can take your car. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's a little late for that, I'd say.
Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe you have something better to do, like transcribing.
It's Saturday. You got a little something. Right there.
What's up, everybody? This is Fred Rachani. I have right here via Zoom a very special guest. He is a filmmaker, an author, the founder of an awesome film festival, and the director of the new film that should be in theaters soon, 18 and a Half, taking place in the Nixon era. We're talking to director Dan Mirvish. Dan, thank you so much for the time. How's everything going?
It's going great. Thanks for having me on, Fred.
Hey, appreciate it. Now, this film is quite interesting. It is a historical dark comedy, as I believe it's described in the press release. It is pretty funny. It is historical. It is quite dark. We won't give too much away. Of course, it stars the great Will Fitzgerald, as seen in Reacher on Amazon Prime. Can you tell us a little bit about how this whole idea came about and kind of the crazy time you had filming this? Because if I understand this correctly, you were almost done filming before this little thing called the pandemic.
Yeah, so it kind of started a few years ago. The last film I did, called Bernard and Huey, had just wrapped the day of the November 2016 election, and I went out to Shelter Island on the tip of Long Island to see Jules Feiffer, who was the screenwriter of Bernard and Huey, and inevitably we started talking about Nixon and Watergate, and because Pfeiffer had essentially won a Pulitzer Prize for his cartoons about Nixon Watergate in the early 70s, and then right after seeing him, I went across the ferry to Shelter Island to Greenport, across the Peconic Bay, and stayed with my friend Terry Keefe, who owns this amazing motel called the Silver Sands Motel, which his grandparents had built in the 50s and 60s. And Terry had really kind of preserved it as a vintage motel, and it's a motel in the summer, but then he had also rented it out for a lot of fashion shoots. And he said, well, hey, if you ever come up with an idea that set in, the mid 70s, we're closed in the winter and everyone can stay here. And he was with me with Pfeiffer. So we sort of had Watergate on the brain and this amazing location. And then I teamed up with a writing partner, Daniel Moya, who then became a producer on the film. He had an aunt and uncle who owned a vintage diner just down the street from the Silver Sands. So we're like, well, that's two locations. We got to make a film now,
That's pretty cool. So those two central locations in the film, it just happened to come about and everything. That's crazy. So when you found out about those two locations, that's when the ball really got rolling, or did you always kind of have a concept in mind that maybe you just didn't put pen to paper yet?
No, it was really the locations, because then it was a question, well, how do you shoot a Watergate film, which is, do you associate with Watergate Hotel or Washington, D.C. and a seaside, resort motel on the tip of Long Island. So the first step is to change its location to the Chesapeake Bay instead of the Peconic Bay. And then in doing a lot of research, and I'd always been fascinated by Watergate. I'd lived in Washington. I'd worked there for a couple of years as a speechwriter. I knew some people involved with Watergate. So I'd always been fascinated about it, but I hadn't really thought of something. But in doing the research, we found out that during the Nixon administration, there really were several different offices that had these voice activated microphones and taping systems. And there really are tapes of Nixon listening to his own tapes and fumbling around with the buttons. And once I realized that, then it was like, oh, okay, now it's plausible that somebody could have a tape of the deleted 18.5-minute gap. And so then it was a matter of getting that character played by Willa Fitzgerald, who's a low-level transcriber in the White House. She gets a hold of this thing. She decides to leak it to a reporter, and then they meet in this motel, basically, and then they run afoul of hippie swingers and nefarious people out to get them.
Yeah, for sure. That's wild. And in terms of the casting process, like, did you have that original cast in mind, or did it kind of change over time, especially with COVID?
Well, the one person that was kind of always in mind was Richard Kind, because he'd been in my last film, and so I knew he was someone that if the schedule worked out, we could work together again. So his character was written a little bit for him, but otherwise, they were all new to me. Willa was recommended by her agent, and then also by my friend Lucky McKee, who had directed her in a film. He said she was great to work with, and so she was the first person we met with, but then kind of thought about some other people, and then really came back to her. We started shooting in March 3rd, I think, 2020. What could possibly go wrong then? And there were definitely some inklings that this pandemic was going to come to the States. And so it was harder to get people then, and it was certainly harder to get people in New York. If they were LA based, they're like, yeah, I don't think now's the best time to travel, so it was tough. So people dropped out, people dropped in. We got John Magaro, who Kelly Reichardt had recommended from First Cow. But, a couple of the actors we got 36 hours before they showed up. Vondi Curtis Hall and Kathy Curtin. They were real last minute, but they were great. They were all of the cast wound up being New York based, and really came through for us. But we got 11 days in, and we found out we were the last film shooting in North America. And we're like, what? We don't want to be the last one shooting. So we shut down and took a 6-month healthy hiatus or pandemic pause. And then came back in September once the Screen Actors Guild and Directors Guild had the COVID protocols in place, and we shot our last 4 days then.
That's wild. And in terms of getting some of these cast members within 36 hours notice, 24-hour notice, I mean, were you, even as an experienced filmmaker like yourself, were you kind of surprised at how well everybody worked together and the chemistry and everything? Because it's not easy.
Yeah, no, exactly. And normally I like to have 3 or 4 days rehearsal on these films. And we had none. But I think what helped was that, we were all staying at this really authentic vintage place. So we all got kind of into the 70s vibe and groove. And it was great for the actors because, before and after, or especially after we would wrap, they could hang out together and eat dinner and drink product placement wine and eat product placement Omaha steaks, for barbecue. And we could talk about the characters, and they could rehearse little bits of dialogue here and there. But I know something Vondi Curtis Hall told me was that, he really liked the fact that there was, he just hit the ground running, because the actors could really respond with surprise, not knowing what the other actors were going to do next. And that was, and that worked with those scenes, it worked with those characters too. So it fit with the film that these characters would be very clueless about what the other characters were going to do, because they were all such strange folks. So in our case, I think it kind of worked. And then we just had this, run up to the pandemic where we were all paranoid and, communally sharing in this global paranoia about what was going to happen next. And I think I certainly wouldn't want to repeat it, but in some ways that kind of helped all of us kind of relate to this, kind of paranoid thriller that we were making.
Definitely. And in terms of funding the film, you've done other films in the past, of course, before, but was it different at all with this one? With this one, or now with social media and everything else? I've seen you've been pretty transparent online. Like, how was this different for some of your past films when it came to funding?
It was about the same, which is to say, I always do crowdfunding on my films. I always have, from even before it was called crowdfunding. In this case, we use Seed and Spark, but I've used Kickstarter before. And then, and then it's about building not so much money, but a community of 300, 400 backers that are all helping you in different ways. And especially when you go through a major catastrophe like a pandemic, you need that moral support as much as you need the financial support. So so that was really, we kind of relied on those folks. And it wasn't really that different than how I've raised money before. We did have to keep raising money in order to shoot those last 4 days. So that was an added burden. I mean, that added, 20% or something to the budget. But, we were able to do it because we had shot that first 80% of the film. I could cut those scenes together and show them to people and get a sense of the, that we had something interesting here.
You said 20%. Is there a cutoff for you as a filmmaker as to like when you realize like, okay, maybe this is going a little too much over budget, or I'm spending a little too much? Like, do you have that point, or is it more, do you look at it more from a creative aspect and worry about the money part later?
Yeah, both, I'm a director and a producer. So, but for me, like, it's important to have enough money to get through production, because with technology and also the skill set I have, I know I can always edit the film on my own, essentially for free, and get pretty far with post-production without spending any extra money if I don't have to, or if I don't have the money. But it's important to pay the actors and the crew and make sure everyone is fed and insured and things like that. So we had enough to get through that first shoot, but the problem with COVID was then it meant you had to then go back and rehire people and re-rent equipment and get, all these, and then the PCR tests were not cheap and were not fast. And we were kind of a guinea pig for the Screen Actors Guild, trying to find places in New York that could do them with 24 hours notice when everyone else was getting, was spending a lot more time. So, and then but once you have something to show people, then it's easier to raise a little bit more money and a little bit more money and a little bit more, and eventually you finish it.
From what I understand too, it's going to be coming out in theaters.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, after 21 festivals on 4 continents, we are now coming out theatrical only for at least the first month or two, and so it's going to be opening May 27th in LA and New York. And then June 3rd, coast to coast around the country. So and this is a rare indie film that's going to have that much of a theatrical release. Just like Top Gun, Maverick. So see that, and then come see our film.
You worked in DC for a while. You were a speech writer.
Yeah.
Now you're really known as a filmmaker. So how did film come into your life, and when did you decide, okay, I want to be full-time in film?
Well, like most people, I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, and I always liked film growing up. There weren't a lot of places to see art house films, but there were a few. And then in college, I took a Super 8 class and really loved that, and then did some summer classes at UCLA in 60 millimeter. But the school I went to didn't have a film program, so I majored in history and political science and really focused on late 20th century American politics, and had done an internship in DC, went out to DC, worked there as a speechwriter. But even as a speechwriter, we did a lot of the speeches. We shot them on video in the basement of the Capitol. There's a couple of video recording studios there, which thankfully the protesters didn't know about. And so I would hang out with the guys in the booth there, and they're like, "Oh, dude, you should go to film school," because if you stay in Washington, by the time you hit 30, someone just gives you a 3-piece suit and a law degree by osmosis. They just appear. And I was like, I don't know that I want that. I kind of like that California thing. Film school smells like eucalyptus and opportunity. So I took a break from Washington and went back out to LA, and this time got into USC film school for my master's program. And instead of just doing a short like most people, I did a feature film as my thesis, and was mentored by Robert Altman, which was pretty amazing. And his grandson is still my producing partner, or one of my producing partners. So yeah, I kind of hit the ground running, and then we started the Slamdance Film Festival, and so I've just been kind of immersed in indie film ever since, and written a book called The Cheerful Subversive's Guide to Independent Filmmaking, and a couple editions of that. So so I'm trying to get back to other folks. I do have got a lot of guest lecturing too. So
That's great. And how did the Slamdance Film Festival come about?
well, my film Omaha the movie, there's my poster for it, didn't get into Sundance, and this was at a time in the mid '90s where, if you the world of independent film was really going Hollywood. Miramax had just become part of Disney, Fine Line had become part of Warner Brothers, Fox was launching Fox Searchlight, and Sundance was like, woohoo, we're going on that Hollywood ride. Come on in, Harvey. And and they kind of forgot about the niche of the first time independent filmmakers working at a low budget with no name actors, and with no distribution in place. And we had all been kind of influenced by that first generation, that first 10 years of Sundance filmmakers. So got together with a bunch of other filmmakers, and we said, well, let's just show up, because distributors at the time were saying, well, we love your film, but if it doesn't get in Sundance, forget it. We're not going to pick it up. You're not going to get into other festivals. You're not going to get agents. You're not going to get a girlfriend. None of that was going to happen. So we really had to show up in Park City. And so that first year in January '95, we had a dozen features and a dozen shorts. And we've kept doing it every year since, even the last 2 years virtually. And because of that, and we kind of stuck to that first time directors and with low budgets and no distribution. I mean, we showed the first films of Bong Joon-ho, Rian Johnson, Christopher Nolan, the Russo brothers, the late Lynn Shelton, the Safdie brothers, Sean Baker, the list is pretty impressive of who we've now showcased as their first film. And that, and often their first film isn't spoken about again, but it's that then that helps launch their careers, and that's kind of what we've always been about.
Would you say it's easier now as a filmmaker with all these different streaming platforms? Is it more complicated? What's kind of like your overall assessment of the current state as a filmmaker and producer?
Well, I think technically it's easier to make a film. I mean, you can make a film on an iPhone. I mean, there's a billion people making films and they call them TikToks now. You just turn it around, it's a TikTok. So the means of production are certainly smaller. But as far as getting the film out there, there's all these streaming services, but you know what? They don't pick up indie films. They just don't. They're all making these big 8-hour episodic, limited series things. They have no interest in acquiring, independent films. And I know, because I've talked to them. And so the distribution is really hasn't changed at all. It's still, and this is a perfect case with 18½, where we're cobbling it together. We've got some great distributor partners, one in London doing the international sales, one in Colorado, who's doing the theatrical release here. But it's also me calling the theaters and saying, and putting them together with the distributor. I'm going to be wearing a sandwich board in front of some of the theaters. You've got to cobble it together. And as a filmmaker, if you're not out there promoting it and wearing a literal sandwich board or a figurative one, no one else is going to do it for you. So, and then with COVID, no one was going back to theaters. Now, hopefully they are, but, so we'll see what happens. But I think film festivals are still like really key for any filmmaker, because festivals are a great way to actually try out your film and meet an audience and travel the world, with your film.
We always like to ask all our guests some kind of random rapid fire questions just to get to know them better. Are you ready?
Okay.
Favorite late night snack?
Those pretzels that are flat and you stick it and you dip them in hummus. Those are good.
All right. All-time favorite actor and actress?
All-time favorite actor and actress. I'll go old school with Sally Kellerman and Elliot Gould.
All right.
Late Sally Kellerman. Yeah.
What film inspired you to really dive into filmmaking?
Well, if I told you that, it would be my bank password. So I've got to give you something a little different. I don't, there's a lot of great ones. There was one called Failsafe that I saw at a late night screening all alone in college, like in the balcony of our college. And it was almost like a play with Henry Fonda and Larry Hagman, which was great. And I was like, oh yeah, that's wow. If these guys can make it with two guys in a room, like literally that's as simple as that movie is, but it's the stakes of the world. And that's a little bit kind of inspires 18 and a half. Like, how do you take a low budget situation with, a handful of actors in two rooms, but have the stakes be the fate of the world? And and now that I'm thinking about it, Failsafe was a really great example of that.
Most awkward moment as a filmmaker?
Lens cap. that's probably, it's things like that. On 18 and a half, I think one of the more, and it was funny, we were shooting a scene in that September time when we came back for those 4 days, and we were shooting about 20 seconds into a take, and all of a sudden we all realized that someone was wearing a mask in the shot. But we had just all become so accustomed to it. We're like, oh yeah, of course they're wearing a mask. It's COVID, and we're like, nope, cut. We gotta reset. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy how it's all normalized now and everything. I recently rewatched Moneyball. I think it was Moneyball, and I think Brad Pitt's character had a mask on. Everybody's looking at him, and that film was from like the early 2010s, and it's just crazy how now it's a normal thing.
Yeah, I know. But hey, whatever people need to do to protect themselves to come see the movie in theaters, please do. Wear a mask, take horse pills, whatever works for you, man. Please come to the theater.
Was there anything you learned in the making of 18 and a half that you didn't before, like something like either like a method or something you learned about yourself as a filmmaker? I mean, it was a very trying time, right? As you alluded to, and all the chaos and everything. Yeah. Was there anything that you learned about yourself and just about the art of filmmaking?
Well, I learned how to make sourdough. That's for sure. But also during that 6 months off, we realized that we could do the recording of the 18 and a half minute tape, which was an all audio, with Bruce Campbell as Nixon, John Cryer as Haldeman, and Ted Raimi as Al Haig, which originally we had just scheduled. It was going to be in post-production. We'd fly these guys to a studio and it would be expensive, but we would make it work. And then we realized about a couple months into the pandemic, we're like, well, hang on a second. Everyone's got Zoom. Everyone's got microphones now. Why don't we just do it on Zoom? And we did. And it was great because Ted was in Canada, Bruce was in Oregon, John was in LA, and we were able to do it at a time when actors couldn't act, directors couldn't direct. No one was on set anywhere. And we realized we could still be creative. We could still, it was kind of like doing a radio drama as part of the movie. We could still keep making a movie, and that was really inspiring, I think, for all of us involved, that, there's a global pandemic and people are dying all around us, but we will keep making films and entertainment and creative and being creative as long as we can.
In addition to being a filmmaker, author, in the past, a speechwriter, a connoisseur of American history, I don't even know what this job title would be. I guess hoaxer. Can you tell us about this elaborate hoax that you were a part of many moons ago?
It was a satire. It was shenanigans. So my friend Eitan Gorlin, another Slamdance filmmaker, and I, we created a character named Marty Eisenstadt, who during the 2008 presidential campaign claimed that he was an advisor to the McCain campaign, and a pundit and a creature of Washington. And this, we were all doing this just as a way to kind of develop this character into a TV pitch. We were pitching this to Comedy Central and MTV and different places. And, but we kind of built a website for him and a blog. And the next thing you know, people started to believe he was real. And he got quoted by the LA Times and Time Magazine, CBS News. And this, by the way, was when fake news was still cool. I might add. And so we just kind of ran with it. And then by the end of that campaign, we wound up getting a book deal. And we're like, book? What's a book? But it coincided with the collapse of the economy in 2008. And this was a little side project we were doing while we were trying to get our next features made. And so when presented with the option, do you get paid to write a book or not get paid to not direct a movie or a TV show, you write a book. So we wrote this memoir of Marty Eisenstadt for R. Strauss Giroux, a very prestigious publisher, as if Marty still thinks he exists and he thinks he's real. And it was this, kind of fun Washington satire that got great reviews, better reviews than any of our films. and then we went back to pitching it as a show, and actually Ashton Kutcher's company was going to make it, and CBS Studios was going to be behind it, and then an executive got fired or something, and the whole thing went poof, as often happens in TV. But it was a great, creative endeavor, and it was also a good lesson that, like, you may think you're working in one medium, but you may find success in a completely different medium. You think it's a short, but it turns into a feature. You think it's a feature and it turns into a book, or maybe it's a play. And you just have to kind of follow the character or follow the style or unique thing, part of storytelling that you've got going on. And that was a great example of it.
So go with the flow.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. What's the best piece of advice you give for success?
Marry well.
I love that. Can you elaborate?
Well, I will. You need to have some sort of partner or partners in life to get you through, not just financially, but emotionally. If you're doing anything creative, you're dealing with 99% rejection 99% of the time, whether it's a script or a film or a play or whatever it is. So you need some sort of emotional backstop or you'll go nuts. And so that's really important. I'm very lucky. I was able to marry someone who's been very supportive of me this time.
That's great. Yeah, I heard from another filmmaker too. Like, if you can't have peace at home, you don't have peace anywhere.
It's true. Yeah. No, you've got to have a good safe space to make this stuff. Because if you're second guessing yourself enough, you don't need other people second guessing you all the time. Mm-hmm. There's going to be plenty of those people. So you need at least someone who believes in you. Love
that. Well said. Well, Dan, we really do appreciate the time. Before we let you go, and one line or less, why should folks check out 18 and a half?
It's a funny movie, and it's a thriller. It's a comedy. If you laugh, it's funny. If you don't laugh, it's just a thriller. And and I think it's different. I read one review that said no one's making films like this these days anymore, ever did. And that, to me, that's like the highest praise. Like, whether it's good or not is another matter, but is it original and different and unique and has great performances, and will you be entertained? And it's short, it's 88 minutes. You can't go wrong if it's so yeah, please see the movie one way or another. Or buy the soundtrack. The soundtrack is for sale wherever fine soundtracks are sold digitally, on iTunes and Spotify, and that just went on sale this week too.
Excellent. Looking forward to that. 18 and a half. Be on the lookout in LA and New York, May 27th, and in June, all throughout the country, everywhere. Yeah. Excellent. And Dan, where can we find you in 18 and a half online?
18 and a half, all spelled out. Well, the 18 is a number, 18, and then AND and half spelled out .com. Mm-hmm. But then also on all the social medias, either danmirvish.com or 18 and a half movie. Yeah, I think the website's 18andhalfmovie.com. On Twitter, it's just 18 and a half. But Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, if I can get that working again. So yeah, we're everywhere.
Great, Dan. Thank you so much for your time. Bonus question. Is there anything you wish I asked you in this interview?
Is there anything you wish you asked me? Well, one quick thing, because you did mention the Marty Eisenstadt book. Mm-hmm. There is a connection between that and 18 and a half. In the book, we have a chapter about Watergate, and Marty Eisenstadt's mother's name is Connie, and she's working in the White House. So that is the origins of Willa Fitzgerald's character come from that character in the book. Now, they're not exactly the same, but the name Connie definitely comes from that. So that's the fun connection for those who remember that book or still have a copy of it.
The Watergate scandal continues to grip the nation as the infamous 18 and a half minute gap in the Nixon tape.
There was a tape.
Yeah, this tape was never subpoenaed. Why?
Nobody knows it exists.
I think the best course of action is that I take the tape.
I give you this tape, you splash it all over the cover of the Times, it gets traced back to me in a heartbeat. You win the Pulitzer and I get indicted. No.
I think there's a motel nearby, the Silver Sands. We go there, we listen to it, we leave.
Well, Caesar, anything is possible, young lady.
I don't know how, but they know we're here.
Hey, who is they?
Could be anyone. Could be the FBI, the CIA, KGB. Could be a Post reporter for all I know. We need to listen to the tape.
You know what to do.
Who is it, dear?
Oh, it's a newlywed couple.
We brought her player from
from home and it was broken. We were wondering if we could borrow yours.
18.5-minute gap.
Maybe. No one is supposed to hear what is happening. What is happening? Nixon. Oh, no. Oh, my goodness.
Can't let this Watergate thing get out of our grip, Bob.
It's a drag.
Like this, Al? I pushed the right 2 buttons, right?
What is that the news? Are you listening to Nixon?
Soak it up. It'll soon be over.
Tomorrow, 30 years from now, I want to be remembered, Bob.
You will, sir. You will.